Hi everyone and welcome back to Stephan Livera podcast brought to you by Bold. Today I have two guests joining me to discuss this whole Bitcoin and quantum thing, and so joining us are some esteemed researchers and developers. So Clara Shikhelman Clara is the head of research at ChainCode, and also Anthony Milton, researcher and open source Bitcoin developer. So first off, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so look, we're going to do our best. Obviously, this can be quite a technical subject. I know you've recently put out this big report, 55-page report. So I've tried to read and understand it, but we're going to do our best to make it accessible for people. I think the first question a lot of people will have is this stuff even a real risk, or is it just kind of overhyped announcements from the likes of Google and Microsoft and whoever? What do you guys think?
I think it's difficult to tell until if we'll have these quantum computers. But I think a lot of serious researchers that were very skeptical changed their minds recently, saying, okay, maybe we should take this seriously. We should have a plan. There's no need to run around panicking, but we should definitely give it some deep thought and be ready, because it went from it's not happening to, well, maybe. And if it's in a well, maybe, we should be prepared.
Yeah. And now I don't understand this as well as you guys do, but some of the skepticism maybe in years gone past was more like, okay, you've got this machine, but it doesn't do anything useful, or two, it doesn't have the error correction that would be required to actually be able to, let's say, crack our Bitcoin private keys. Is that like a fair summary of some of the skepticism in the past, and now things are changing, it seems?
Absolutely. So until maybe Google's announcement late last year, error correction was a massive issue, but Google had kind of a breakthrough with achieving something called below threshold, which means that as they add more physical qubits to the system, they see the error rates drop. So now they can throw more resources at the problem, and the error rates should reduce, and the systems should be more stable. So this is something that was, I guess, talked about for 30 years or so, and it's been demonstrated late last year. And so people are starting to pay attention, like, okay, maybe there's a path forward. It's maybe not so much science fiction anymore. Maybe it's just down to the engineering. If we can get the engineering right, things can really start to kick off.
Excellent. And maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about, why you wrote this report. Why now?
We wrote this report because we felt there was a lot of talk about quantum computing, a lot of FUD. On the one side, you had people absolutely panicking and, I believe, overreacting. And on the other end, there are people that are just, we're not interested, we shouldn't be talking about this. And there are some deep decisions to be made. So we thought it's important to start the discussion on a very good ground, having all of the information available, so the research and the in-community discussions can be held, and we can move forward in a timely manner.
Great. And so again, doing our best to make this accessible for, let's say, the everyday hodler, the everyday Bitcoiner who's not sort of technically in the detail. Maybe if you guys could walk us through what are some of the relevant Bitcoin basics here in terms of things like, okay, the ECD, SA and Schnorr, and this discrete logarithm problem, and a little bit of those basics, so that we can understand a bit about what exactly is the problem here, or the potential problem.
So I think the basics of all of cryptography is that you're assuming there is a difficult problem. Something is difficult to do. So when we're talking about public and private keys, such as in ECDSA and all of the signature schemes pretty much, including the ones used in Bitcoin, the cryptographic assumption is that given a public key, as you show on chain, it is difficult to impossible to have the private key. So if I can show that I have the private key, this means that I know something. I have the secret, I own these funds. And then with quantum computing, this assumption can break. Suddenly, going from a public key to a private key goes from infeasible, impossible, takes time, longer than the universe, so on, to something that can indeed happen, given a strong enough, of course, quantum computer. And this means that suddenly your funds might not be safe anymore, because if your public key is visible on chain, for example, or is out there before, and a public key by its name, it's meant to be public. You shouldn't be hiding it. So if somebody has your public key, suddenly they can get the private key and use the funds. And then
Excellent.
we need
Okay.
to change to something else.
Yeah. And so because this is kind of a very key thing, let me just try and explain it again, just in like simple terms. I mean, I think you did a great job, but I'm just going to try and explain it as I understand it. So in Bitcoin, one of the things that we do is we, whether we're using like a cold card or a phone wallet, what we're doing is we are signing a message that essentially proves that we control the private key. And what we're sort of using to do that is, I guess, this assumption that it's kind of easy to go one way but hard to go the other way. I.e., if you have the private key, it's very easy to to understand what would the public key be for that. But if you're going back the other way, the public key, it's not so easy to do that. That's kind of the key thing.
Exactly.
And so in simple terms, when I send a Bitcoin transaction, really what's going on kind of under the hood in simplified terms is I am, let's say, signing a message that lets me spend these coins out of an address, to which I control the private keys for that, and I'm locking them to, let's say, your public, to your address, to which you control the private keys for that. And so this is the thing that, whether we're talking in the ECDSA paradigm or the Schnorr paradigm, it's this is the thing that could potentially change in the quantum computer, if one became sufficiently powerful enough. And then, as I understand from your report and just in general, it's using these quantum computers that are using Shor's algorithm. Fair summary, or would you want to elaborate on that?
So Shor's algorithm is more relevant in the context of mining.
No, that's Braver's. You've got to
Anthony,
be stuck.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
because and I guess that's the other point we should touch on, right? There's an impact at the, let's say, the private key aspects, and then there's an impact on the mining side of it. And I believe one of them is Shor's and the other is Grover's.
Yeah. So Shor's is for the private key, public key break, and it's based basically it solves the discrete logarithm problem, which basically is what EDSA is and what Schnorr is. So it allows you to derive the private key from the public key. And I guess probably going to talk about this a lot, but when you have exposed public keys, that's bad news for quantum computers, quantum attackers, because that going back, as he said, which takes an infeasibly long time, it could be reduced to, optimistically, let's say hours or days. So if there's a public key that's exposed, the private key could be snatched, and then the attacker can actually sign for those funds. Your money's gone, your funds are gone.
Yeah. Okay. And now, could you also explain for us what's the impact on the mining side?
So on the mining level, this is something that we're significantly less worried about currently, just because it's a more difficult problem. Like the time for quantum mining to be relevant is very, very long. Like just because ASICs are so efficient that competing with them would be very difficult. But given that, with Grover's algorithm, you can do things significantly quicker. And also, you can't do things in parallel. So this means we can see centralization, because suddenly it's not like you have two miners, they're working, and in expectation, they'll get whatever they put in. Now, if we're going to quantum mining, if they'll be working together, the results would be better. And then everybody is motivated just to create this one huge miner, which absolutely shatters mining decentralization.
Yeah. So in the current classical sense with ASICs, if you add another ASIC to the system, or you double the number of ASICs or the hash power you've got, you're basically halving the chance to get the block, or doubling rather, to chance to get the block. Whereas if you in the quantum space, if you don't want to have double the systems. You want to have the fastest system possible. You want to get the best single system possible rather than throwing multiple independent resources at the problem. So it like changes the dynamics of how mining operates, and then it could lead to this centralization problem in mining. But as Clara said, like this is much further into the future than the risks that Sure brings. So we worry about the private key break much sooner than
Much earlier than the mining side of it.
Yep, absolutely.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think that seems to be what most people kind of are how most people are understanding this. And so let's now deal in the private keys and public keys world. I guess obvious questions people will have: how many coins are at risk? What would this mean for us as Bitcoiners?
Yeah, it's pretty substantial at the moment. So we've just finished deep dive on the data, and we're going to be publishing it soon. But it looks like about 33% of the current supply is at risk due to exposed public keys. And there's three main vectors or categories for the exposure. So we've got address reuse. So that's when you have a bunch of you've spent from an address that still has some UTXOs attached to it, still has funds attached to it. So you spent on chain, you've exposed a public key. So the attacker could derive the private key for that. We've got the inherently vulnerable scripts. So these are the very early legacy script types like pay to public key and pay to multisig. Pay to multisig, no one uses it anymore. Don't be fooled. Multisig, it's normally done with the other hash script types. But those two types are the legacy types. And we also have pay to taproot that also has a public key exposed in by default. So these are the three inherently vulnerable types. And then we've also got things like spends on forks of Bitcoin. So remember Bitcoin Cash, the whole wars back then, 2017. So a lot of Bitcoiners dumped their Bitcoin Cash, but still held their Bitcoin. So they transacted on Bitcoin Cash and they exposed the public keys, but they still held basically the same UTXOs on Bitcoin. So now they've actually exposed the public keys on Cash or other forks, BSV, whatever. They're still sitting there on Bitcoin. That obviously after the fork, that exploded. That number went crazy. It was like 3 million Bitcoin were kind of quantum vulnerable at that point, and that's reduced now to something like 150,000.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's pretty substantial. But address reuse is like probably on the order of 70% of those funds. So about 4.5 million Bitcoin is vulnerable due to address reuse at the moment.
Okay, gotcha. So let's just summarizing that overall. So you said the overall number of quantum vulnerable coins, right. So as we speak today, what is it, like 19.8? I've got to pull up that number again. As we speak today, I think it's like 19.9 million,
like
19.9 million coins have been mined into existence. And then of that 19.9, you're saying 33% are vulnerable to quantum. So we're talking something like 6 million, let's say.
6.5, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then of that 6.5, you're saying 4.5 million are the ones vulnerable because of address reuse, and the others are because of the script type, like Satoshi or the Patoshi coins and this kind of thing, right? Gotcha.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yep.
And then just quick explanation for listeners who are not familiar, right? You might just be used to using your standard Bitcoin wallet. Actually, in the background, there's scripting going on, and there may be different script types that your wallet is using under the hood without you really knowing or caring as much, right? And kind of sometimes the address can give you a clue about that, but it's not always, right? So the address is starting with a 1, the address is starting with a 3, address is starting with BC1 and the new Taproot addresses. But as you said, there are different script types that relate to, let's say, earlier use of Bitcoin, and those are the ones that are more vulnerable because the public key is already exposed. And then
almost no one's using them nowadays. Like we've looked at the transaction volume of these, and it's like minuscule. So no one's using pay to pub key. No one's using pay to multisig. Or sorry, some people are using pay to multisig now because they can start smuggling data in. But anyway, put that aside.
Right, that's more of a spammer thing. But yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yep. Most people are using like the hash script types. So these are the types that are only vulnerable if you're spending from them, and then you're still holding funds associated with that address.
Gotcha.
So
yeah,
people
and so
are using pay to taproot. I think this is important.
Pay to taproot,
pay to taproot
Yeah.
is gaining popularity, and Yeah, and on the most basic level, if you're using Taproot, then your public key is visible on chain.
Gotcha. And so with Taproot, there's this concept of the key path and the script path. I guess we'll come to that later. But just to, I guess, explain, as you said, the script types that are not as vulnerable, as you said, there are cases where the public key is not directly put on chain. It's a hash of the public key. And that's why you were saying in the case where address reuse, that's where there's a risk, because now the public key has been exposed to the world and it's literally on the chain for anyone to see. And so these script types relate to, I think I'm just listing out here, pay to pub key hash, pay to script hash, pay to witness pub key hash, and pay to witness script hash. So those are the, let's say, less vulnerable script types. Now, another thing, just kind of in our ecosystem and as users, we may have played around with XPubs, right? The famous XPubs, or might be included in what's called an output descriptor. And so this is how many people might be using, let's say, as an example, Sparrow Wallet or Nunchuck, or these Electrum-based things that call out to an Electrum server, and that also includes your master public key. So what are some of the implications there? I'll give you an example. So let's say you are using an HD, hierarchical deterministic master XPub, just on a typical single signature hardware wallet setup. Can the quantum attacker pwn all your coins if he gets your XPub?
No. Short answer is no, because most of the derivations are hardened. And so to create a hardened path in a HD wallet, you need to actually use the private key. To create the unhardened paths in a wallet, you can do that with the public key. So I think most wallets or most services, you'd have only risk of anything that's non-hardened, which would be minuscule. It'll basically only refer to the account that you're sharing. So I think most wallets probably only expose count level XPubs rather than the master ones.
I see. Okay, gotcha. So but then if you are still exposing an account level XPub, couldn't the quantum attacker still get, the coins associated for that account level XPub, which would in practice hold your keys,
account level, yeah.
Your coins, let's say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I guess,
but it couldn't go outside that, and
right.
If you're mixing, you can't go up the chain either. So it depends on how compartmentalized your wallet is. Like the point of this HD wallets was to compartmentalize damage, I suppose. Yeah. And so if your wallet uses that standard, what is it? Bit 44, I think. Yep. If you go a few levels down, you typically see you'd see the apostrophes in the the
right. That signifies that hardened or not, right?
That's hardening. So you see multiple slashes and apostrophes, blah blah, continue, and then you'd have basically the account level, and so anything at that level down is going to be exposed, but anything above it is protected.
Yeah. But my understanding is actually a lot of the, let's say, now my understanding here, you guys correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but my understanding is in most of the, because BIP39 and some of these things weren't adopted by Core, and I think maybe there was slightly different concepts of whether you should harden or not harden, and I think there were a lot of the typical commercially used Bitcoin software and hardware, they kind of use the unhardened thing for practicality and ease of use reasons, but theoretically that's less secure against this risk, right?
Yeah, probably on a service by service basis, right? Probably check what you've shared and try and determine your risk level. I don't think at this stage people should worry too much about it, but it's certainly something to be aware of. What is your exposure? And if you're with a service, not naming names, but if you're with a service and they've used some what would be considered
unhardened,
hassle them, let them know, hey, fix your service.
Yeah. The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold vault. The Bold vault is a 2 of 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bolt holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Coldcard hardware wallets to spin up a Bolt vault in just a few minutes, and the Bolt Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bolt today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbolt.io. And now, back to the show. But you know what? It might be in practice, not trying to, point the finger, but I think in practice, there may be a lot of, let's say, Electrum users. Now, to be fair to Electrum, it's an OG wallet from 2011. The whole point of what they're trying to do is get people to be non-custodial, right? Self-custodial and not leave things on the exchange. They want it to be very quick and easy to set up. But as part of that Electrum wallet user might just be connecting to random public Electrum servers. And in doing so, expose his account level XPub, which means he could get pwned.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's, I guess these are
something
things
to be
people
aware
have to
of,
think
right?
about.
Yeah. Like we need to just make it. We're trying to disseminate this information, let people know, like, okay, look, this is a risk. You should look into this. We may be hazy on some of the details, but follow it up.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And so now let's talk a little bit about what are some of the main mitigations possible, and what are some of the approaches that you and other researchers are looking at?
I think like the immediate call to action, this is going back to what Anthony said earlier, stop address reusing. This is a terrible habit. It's bad for privacy. It's bad now. And if the quantum risk is the motivation that you need to stop address reuse, this is the number one actionable item, because this, first of all, it's a bad practice on privacy level. Second of all, in all of these cases of address reuse, or at least in most of them, people have access to the private key. They can move the funds. It's not coins from, a decade ago that maybe are lost. So I think there are some immediate actions to be done now. Also, be aware of everything that you talked about, Electrum and so on, XPubs. Be more aware of what's going on and follow best practices. For the long term, right now we're in the research phase. So there's a bunch of very serious researchers, very good cryptographers, Bitcoin developers, and so on, that are examining the state of quantum cryptography in the wider academic space. There's lots of interest. It's a very popular research topic, lots of publications. So in this point of time, there's work to be done there, following the research that is happening. And maybe we'll get back to this later, but there are schemes that are quantum secure right now. But because it's very new cryptography, first of all, there's like an efficiency problem. But also, when you're working with cryptography, the main reason you assume that it's not broken is that it's been around for a bit and nobody has broken it yet. So there is value into taking the time, reading the publication, giving it some time to mature, let a lot of smart people look at it and try to break it, and then choose what kind of cryptographic schemes are the right ones for Bitcoin, and then move forward.
Yeah, and this is worth understanding. Like, I recall even in the Bitcoin world, things like Music 1 was insecure versus certain kinds of attacks, and then they came out with Music DN and Music 2, which is secure against those things. So even in the Bitcoin world, this kind of thing can happen. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the mitigations. I know you spell some of these out. Probably now would be a good time to explain that Taproot thing with, in Taproot we have the key path spend and then the script path spend. So could you just explain a bit about that and the relevance here in the quantum context?
Sure. So as we said earlier, we were in general talking about public keys that are exposed. And then when we're talking about Taproot you can spend in two ways. There's the key path, where it's just as any other address. You sign using a private key, you spend, you move on. The script path, there you can put scripts. It comes from the name, and then you can put other conditions there for the spend to go. So I think if we'll go deeper into what do we do in the day if a quantum computer appears, it might be that we want to disable the key path and only allow the script path, while in the script path we have something that is quantum secure. And I think it might make more sense if we talk about the general ways forward.
The schemes, yeah.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of schemes or discussions happening, and they differ on a few levels. But maybe one deep question is, let's say we chose a quantum secure signature scheme. What do we do with addresses that didn't move? Like, we have it, it's merged, it's available for 10 years, and then we have a quantum computer. What happens to the old coins? What happens to coins that didn't move to this secure scripts and so on? So with Taproot, you can just like hide in the script path something that is quantum secure and keep using it as usual. But maybe it's a good opportunity to dive into what do we want to do with people that didn't do that, with Satoshi's coins and so on.
Yeah, right, because I can imagine this will be a big debate also. I've seen already some different arguments made on either side. I think Jameson Lopez put out an argument more on the burning the coin side of it. There are others who are more in the, do nothing and let the chips fall where they may. So maybe you want to talk a little bit to that, and then we can sort of go into more specific, like what are some of the mitigations?
So yeah, Anthony has been doing some really nice work looking at addresses that could be stolen from, and maybe it's good for people to be informed where the chips might fall if we let them.
Okay, well, we call it the burn versus steal dilemma, I suppose. I guess it's probably going to be the most difficult thing to resolve from all of this. I think there's going to be the technical proposals, and there'll be a lot of back and forth, and we'll arrive at something eventually. I don't know about this burn and steal. It seems like it's going to be a divisive issue. You have, I guess, concerns about property rights and confiscation and the like, and people falling into different camps. And one side thinks that, well, it incentivizes people to the first to develop a quantum computer that can scoop up these funds. There's a bounty there, great, so that they can collect that bounty and put those coins back into circulation. However, that could be disastrous for the market that we have now in Bitcoin. There's so much financialization. There's so much risk-averse entities, I suppose, and that would just be a massive problem for them. Lop, I think, phrased it quite well in the sense that this could be like seen as a protocol bug. So this is something that we just need to sort of like, where, all right, these funds are gone. Let's just count them as gone and move on. And how we do that, I guess, that's how we determine what funds are gone. That's, I guess, also a challenging question. Would we say that like pay to pub key, pay to multi-sig, or certain all script types wholesale, just we have to carve out? Or do we have to give people like a deadline to say, hey, if you haven't migrated by a particular point, your funds are going to be locked and burnt? But at the moment, the risk is for that 6.5 million Bitcoin, like the risk overwhelmingly lies with custodians and exchanges who do things like address reuse. So some of those people are the ones that are saying, hey, the law of the jungle, let's go. Yet they're probably some of the most exposed at the moment. So it seems strange that they've, it is easy to remove the risk of address reuse. You literally just need to transact to a script type where there's no public key exposed and you're done. there's operational reasons perhaps for some of these exchanges and these custodians to be reusing. But like, yeah, it makes you wonder what the motivation is. So I've touched on a few different areas there, but we can dive into any details in it.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe I'm just thinking out loud. It could be that those exchanges are just confident that, all right, once we've decided the new quantum scheme, we'll just rotate all our stuff over into the new quantum scheme. And for now, we just want to keep doing address reuse from their perspective because it's easier or it's less technical, technical hassle to deal with. Because, if I give a customer an address to deposit into, I have to keep watching that address. And it's now if I start doing like tons of addresses, it becomes very computationally or operationally difficult. Maybe that's their steel man, let's say.
Yeah, although honestly, there are modern solutions that make the management of these things easy. It's cheaper on chain, so there's really no financial reason not to do that. Besides, laziness, I guess, or lack of resources.
I mean, I agree, of course, but I just remember. I remember when SegWit came out, there was like people were campaigning at exchanges, and famously blockchain.info was so late that I think they were like 4 or 5 years late. People were like, when SegWit, and it's like a new address type, and we want to use it, and it's cheaper and better and lightning, and helps stop transaction malleability, all of these things. But they were still kind of slow on it. So I don't know, but maybe it's different now, 2025, and let's say another 5 years down the line, it's more advanced and people are going to use the newest, latest stuff. I don't know. Go on.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add a bit to the burn versus steal. So something that changed my mind a bit. So there's like the rule of the jungle. People, the whole burn. Then there's suggestions like the hourglass, where in each block will allow a single transaction that is from old addresses that we can suspect that
as like a natural rate limiting factor.
Yeah, rate limiting. And in the beginning I thought it's a good idea, but then recently I changed my mind just at looking at the numbers. So if we introduce back into the system every 10 minutes 100 Bitcoin, that's sort of, that sounds a bit like inflation, right? Suddenly
because people would have this feeling of they're cycling in back old Satoshi coins or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that whoever is doing it is not doing it to hodl. They'll just bring them back into the system, sell them immediately. They're not the rightful owners. They don't have the private key. They just.
But I mean, I guess it also kind of depends on your view and when this happens, right? Imagine this happens in 15 or 20 years and the world is sort of very close to hyper-Bitcoinization. Then at that point, what are they going to sell the coins for, right? Are they going to just hodl them because we're living in the Bitcoin standard? So I guess the risk is, are they going to dump them all in one big thing and crash the market or whatever? I don't know. I mean, who knows? There's too many moving parts to really predict, right?
Yeah. No, it's very difficult, but I'm assuming that if there are a few people that are able to do that, you don't want to be the second person going to sell your Bitcoin, right? Because by then the price has crashed.
Yeah,
so if
and whoever cracks it they get to become the new emperor of the world and have 3 million coins or whatever. I mean, who knows? One other thing, actually, I just remembered I did want to ask this question. Just you can explain for listeners. Long range attacks versus short range attacks. Can you explain that in the quantum context? What are they?
Of course. So we were talking about exposed public keys. So if your public key is exposed, you are open to a short range attack. This means that if somebody has a strong enough quantum computer, they can look at your public key, get the private key, and sign in your name and steal your funds. And this is something they can do, let's say, within hours or days, given a strong enough computer. And this is a long range attack. Short range attack. The long range.
It's a bit inverted. Long range is when for example, the public key is on chain, and you can see it for long periods of time. It's their long exposure, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah, long range is
Gotcha.
non-exposure, public keys on chain, for example. Short range is like, okay, it needs to be exploited either between like when a transaction's broadcast and then confirmed,
Gotcha.
or even shortly after it's been confirmed, if like the attacker has access to the
To
capability
like
to
a
do
high
like short
amount of mining
short
power.
yeah,
Yeah.
short reorgs or something, right? So
Gotcha.
short range
Yeah.
is like the narrow window, and long range is like all those reuse addresses, all those like pay to taproot, pay to pub key, pay to multi-sig stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, so
I think
summarizing
like
then, the long range attacks are the ones that are, these coins are already vulnerable, right? As in the public key has already been exposed, it's in a vulnerable script type, or there's address reuse, and the quantum attacker, hypothetically, can just kind of look at those, and he could be grinding it out for the next 6 months or 1 year if he's hypothetically got the quantum machine that can do it now, and broadcast those transactions to, let's say, steal the coins into his own quantum resistant, whatever setup. But the short range attack is more like, imagine you have not doxed your public keys and you just go to broadcast your transaction just like you would a normal transaction. And at that moment, before that transaction gets confirmed into a block, the quantum attacker at that time, he sees your public key. He goes, oh, hey, that's Anthony's public key for his coins. And my quantum computer is so powerful that I can quickly compute and back out his private key and then send a new transaction with a higher fee to myself, and do that in the space of 10 minutes or a few hours if that's the timing that your transaction was broadcast in this example.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, I think that names that are less confusing are immediately vulnerable and upon spend.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So
yeah.
immediately vulnerable are the ones that we already see the public keys and we can immediately attack given
Yeah.
a quantum computer. And then upon spend is something that becomes vulnerable.
Right.
Well,
This episode is brought to you by CoinKite, the makers of my favorite Bitcoin hardware wallet, the Cold Card Q. Now, some people think self-custody is too hard, but it's really about taking responsibility for your Bitcoin wealth and understanding that self-custody gives you a true feeling of liberty. The Cold Card Q has a full keyboard and big screen. It's got 2 secure elements and a true air gap, allowing you to go fully air-gapped using QR codes from seed generation to transaction signing. You can power the device using 3 AAA batteries, so you don't even have to plug it into the wall for power. You can easily use it with Sparrow Wallet for PC or Nunchuck on mobile, and you can dial it into the right level of security and complexity that you choose. If you want a simple setup, just use 12 words and single signature. If you want passphrases, easy. If you want to add multi-sig or co-signing features, you've got those too. So go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get 10% off on your cold card or other devices and level up your self-custody today. This episode is brought to you by Galoy, builders of banking software for the Bitcoin age. After years of risk and uncertainty, Bitcoin and banking are colliding. The regulatory environment is rapidly shifting in favor of Bitcoin and digital assets. Fintechs and crypto-native companies can become chartered banks, and traditional banks and credit unions will launch Bitcoin products. But the legacy core banking software that many financial institutions run on wasn't built for Bitcoin. The Galoy banking infrastructure stack delivers all the key elements of a modern core banking platform, with cloud-native infrastructure, event-based architecture, and robust APIs coming together to meet the security, scalability, and reliability needs of banks of the future. Whether you are launching a modern financial institution from the ground up, or you are adding Bitcoin-backed lending or payments to your product offering, talk to the team at Galoy. Visit galoy.io or reach out to the team at biz@galoy.io.
when
Because,
you spend it.
as we said, in order to spend your coins, you are broadcasting to the blockchain or into the mempool, and which goes into the blockchain, your public key and the signature and the whatever satisficing signatures you need to sign and conditions to move those coins or spend those coins. And I guess crucially, it's probably fair to point out here that there's a difference in the, let's say, the power of the quantum machine that would be required for those, right? Because if you're putting a requirement that this quantum attacker needs to do it in the next 10 minutes or a few hours versus this quantum attacker has 6 months to sort of try to back out a private key, maybe he would go for like these addresses or keys that control a large amount of coins and do that on a 6-month basis versus like this sort of immediate sort of 10 minutes to a few hours time frame, right?
Yep.
You can also think about a quantum attacker that is either a miner or associated with a miner, and then they can try and they see a really juicy transaction appearing on chain,
Right.
revealing its public key, And
Right. They
then
can be like,
they
Coinbase just
derive the
moved their cold
private key
storage.
and
Let
reorg.
me go to work. Or Binance just moved their cold storage. Let me put my quantum machine on the task. This kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and let's reorg the chain. Let me be the owner of this. Let's go back and
Yeah. And of course, there would be all the normal questions about like, are they kind of the social trust if we start seeing like these massive reorgs or these, if we were to start seeing like huge every time a big transaction happens, like there's like a huge reorg attempt on that particular transaction or that particular block, then people would start to question, the credibility of the overall system. And so that's kind of another whole debate and argument people will have too. I guess if the quantum attacker is maybe really sneaky about it, he might do smaller amounts and like only do small bits to try to stay under the radar and not get detected. But I don't know. Maybe it's like a weird game theory thing, and I don't know. We can go into hours of discussion about that.
honestly, if I would have
yeah.
a quantum computer like capable of these kinds of things, I would probably not go for Bitcoin first. I would go to things that keep breaking, like bridges, all
Right.
sorts of So I would just go like, oh no, this broke.
Another bridge hack, because that happens all the time anyway, right?
Yeah,
And so maybe there'd be
then,
like
yeah.
a plausible deniability there. That was it a quantum thing or just like a smart contract failure somewhere? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Although maybe people could sort of back it out based on what happened. But anyway, let's go to the mitigations part. As I understand, in your paper as well, you spell some of these out. It looks like the CDR scheme, this commit delay reveal scheme, and QRAMP are some of the main ones. Can you explain some of those, or maybe we'll take it one at a time? So, what's the CDR scheme?
All right, so there's a few different variants of it, but I guess the one way to describe kind of all the variants is that you hide your current public key, your like elliptic curve public key, behind some commitment. So you do something, you hash it, you put it on chain like in a not return or something, and then there's like a soft fork that happens, and that soft fork introduces rules that says, okay, you can only now use, you can only transact with by revealing a commitment and showing that you had created this commitment in the first place. So like it's basically a way to prove that you knew the private key at the commit time. So you do something well ahead of time, and then later down the track you say, haha, I did this long ago, so that ensures that I was the rightful owner back then. There's a lot of different variants of it. That's kind of like the simplest way I've thought about describing it. Hopefully
Yeah. No, I think
simply.
it makes sense. And then, what's the QRAMP? What's a quantum resistant address migration protocol?
Yeah, that's probably one of the more severe proposals, in the sense that it's basically saying after this date, these transaction types are no longer permissible.
Like valid or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. So it's basically like severe locking of the rules. So, for example, any elliptic curve protected or UTXOs, you can no longer spend them. So it assumes that there's been like a transition to some sort of post-quantum signature scheme, and then after that flag day, if you haven't migrated, too bad, you can't transact. So in some ways, this is like a realization of that whole burn the coins.
Oh, gotcha. So maybe it's kind of like for technical reasons, it might be cleaner hypothetically to do the burn style, because then we know for sure all the coins that exist going forward were quantum protected by their rightful owner and are not being stolen in the rule of the law of the jungle kind of context.
Yeah. So QRAMP doesn't really say like how to achieve that like post quantum signature scheme. It just says like assume that we've got one in place. We're just going to say like after this day, no more.
It's
you
kind of
can't
like
use
a flag day from now on. Only quantum safe signatures are allowed, or transaction types are allowed.
So it's super unambiguous. Like it's very clear as to what's going on. But I guess that's the controversy of the burn vest still approach. Like it's
interesting. Yeah, but now that you mention that, it kind of does kind of make a bit more sense on the burning side, because it would have the benefit of increasing or improving the credibility of Bitcoin as a system, because it would be like the community and the developers and everyone can credibly say no. Only the people who rightfully held the coins are the ones spending these coins. It's not kind of like a rampant theft kind of thing.
Yep.
One other concept that might be interesting to talk about related to this mitigation is if it's known in advance, and there are ways that, as an example, let's say your wallet type, your software wallet type, can be created in a way where we have the normal spend type, but there's also this quantum resistant type. And then the idea is everyone just starts migrating to these wallets that are, let's say, quantum aware or quantum resistant. And then hopefully if that's done in advance, so let's say 5-10 years in advance of the kind of the Q day or the big, the day that the quantum computers can hack our Bitcoins, then it's kind of a more gradual transition, and it's sort of a bit more graceful because now all these people would already be quantum safe, providing there's like at that point, okay, the quantum day has happened, and now we have to do this soft fork to disable the old script types or the old transaction types and say from now on, only quantum secure transaction types are allowed.
I mean, that's probably the ideal situation. Like that's kind of what I think we would all hope for. So technically everything's in place. People start to do as they're transacting in their everyday business, they start to adopt these new transaction types, these new signature schemes. And so naturally, by virtue of just, having to transact, people move into these protected schemes. I mean, it supposes that you've got a scheme in place in the first place. So that's kind of like a big technical blocker or consensus blocker, I suppose. And then you still have questions about what about the stuff that hasn't transferred by the time Q day comes? What are we going to do with that? So I think that we want that to happen, but there's still unsolved questions that we need to sort of like dig into as a community.
Yeah.
But what you've outlined is, I think, what we probably all hope for. The way the transition happens anyway.
Gotcha. Because that's at least the least disruptive, hopefully,
Yeah.
right? We want this to be as the lowest disruption possible. And now, probably also good to talk about selecting new quantum resistant hash algorithms. As I understand, the trade-offs here are going to be things like it might be larger size transactions. It may be more compute required. So there may be debates there on, okay, are you reducing the transaction capability now of Bitcoin? And, are there going to be arguments there about like, should you have like a new quantum type, but also raise the block size to compensate, or just, deal with it and just, have less transaction capability per block, let's say?
I think it's very early to talk about this because this is such a growing field. But at some point, as we get closer and as the research feels more mature, we will have to choose some kind of a signature type, signature scheme. And it might be larger, might be less efficient. And then there are witness discounts, there are all sorts of structures. But right now, the quantum secure signature schemes don't offer the full functionality that we see from classical ones. So this is one reason to wait. But then if indeed the transactions would be larger, then we can definitely consider a witness like a quantum discount, the way we had witness discount. This is, we've done it once, and I don't think it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and I guess hypothetically by then the blocks, maybe our internet capacity and our computing and our hard drive costs are lower in 5-10 years time or 15 years time, whatever. Sorry, go on, Anthony.
Yeah, the history of the developments of these post-quantum schemes is that it's like starting in the 70s, there was Lamport schemes, and they were like huge. You had huge signature skies, huge pub key sizes. So they pretty much you can't really use them because there's other reasons as well, but they were just both signature and public key were massive. And then as you progress, you get variants of that, like the Merkle schemes, and then they're a bit smaller. So the public keys are equivalent to what we've got with Schnorr and EDSA, but the signatures were still massive. And then you had, and those are all called hash-based post-quantum cryptography schemes. Then you've got some new ones like the lattice schemes and the isogeny schemes. Again, there's improvements in the sizes, so they're not so large in terms of public keys and signatures. But like, for example, I think the isogen ones, they are like, the time to verify or time to sign is like off the charts. It's like
Yeah.
130
Looking at your
times.
chart, it's 135,000 times. For visual listeners, we'll put that table on the screen. Yeah, do you have any views on, is there any kind of a consensus or view about which of these potential, schemes would be
Wait and
good?
see.
Yeah. Or is it
No,
just
as
wait
Clara
and
said
see?
earlier,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
efficiency wise, like we're going to get better schemes as we go. Like NIST is I guess the government agency that is being responsible for managing, I guess, or trying to establish the standards for post-quantum cryptography, doing it over the last decade or so. And they've got this long-running like standardization process, and they've gone through multiple rounds of like looking at proposals and seeing if they like survive the test, and going through the next round, and just like a global community is evaluating, testing, kicking the tires, making sure these things are tight. And a few years ago, one of the like highly favored schemes was broken in a weekend by some cryptographers, like on just like a desktop computer in a few hours, and that was like one of the favored schemes, right? So there's inherent challenges with, I guess, developing this tech, and the longer something's been around, like the more confidence we've got in it. So people do have a lot of confidence in the hash-based approaches because they've been around for so long, so many eyes, so much opportunity to break them, and they're seen as secure. But they do have the downsides of like the large signature sizes and the like, which has led to some people like Ethan proposing like use of Starks to sort of have this like compression of the data in transaction data. So instead of having like a few hundred potential like quantum transactions, you could have like a effective transaction or throughput of Bitcoin, which is like an order of magnitude larger than we've got now, right? So people talk about Bitcoin's like 7 transactions a second at the moment, something like that. With some of these like newer cryptographic approaches, combining it. Well, I mean, the motivation is maybe post quantum crypto, you can maybe get like a increase in throughput to like 70, 80 transactions a second, just by compressing the transaction data using these new techniques. Obviously, like a lot of this stuff is still new, could be broken. Like the Ethereum, I hate to say it, but like Ethereum's doing some great research in this area. So watch this space. A lot of people are working in it. It's just going to get better and better over time. But in the Bitcoin community, we need to start the conversation now. We need to start now. That's what we're doing. Let's get working on this. Let's get cracking, so that when the time comes around, everything will go smoothly.
Yeah. Now, I have seen, also speaking of Bitcoin implications kind of to our industry, our ecosystem, I have seen some discussion from developers talking about, hang on, in the quantum world, post-quantum day or whatever, there may be certain Bitcoin techniques that are no longer secure. So examples I've seen, people have said submarine swaps, the thing that makes them atomic, from like off-chain to on-chain swaps, that may go. Like we may lose that if we, or I've heard another one around silent payments that may go, or some of these other crypto tricks that we're using now, they may also become insecure or not usable. Do you have any, I don't know, if you've done any exploration on those kinds of things?
Not at this point. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay. It's something I've sort of seen some discussion about it. I'm not 100% sure, to be clear.
Yeah, but I will say that I'll be surprised if you can't do something similar to silent payments or submarine swaps using given a quantum scheme, that it can't be translated from one to the other. So take it with a grain of salt, but I'm pretty sure this.
Yeah, but maybe it just changes like the usability aspect of it, right? Like as an example, if silent payments still works, but in the quantum resistant version, it's like way less easy to scan and therefore, not as practical for the user, that kind of thing. So that might be, maybe that's where they were getting at. I'm not 100% sure. I've just, when I'm watching different discussion, I sort of see some chatter here and there, and but things to think about as well, because then, or I don't know if it would have an impact on things like, I don't know, people wanting to do PTLCs instead of HTLCs in Lightning. Maybe that changes. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's based on like Taproot and stuff. Look, there's going to be heaps of change necessary because fundamentally the crypto is going to operate in different ways. Like we got some we got some like wicked capabilities with like key aggregation and like, which remains to be seen that we're going to get that with the post quantum schemes. So yeah, like it's going to take time before we maybe get to parity with what we've got potentially. Like I don't think we're kind of been blessed in some ways with like
the capabilities we have.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm curious, I don't know if you know, but does this also impact schemes like Shamir's secret sharing? Like I know, for example, the Trezor guys like that for the backups, right? They like that. Would this quantum stuff screw with that? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. All right. Now, I've also seen in your report you talk about a dual track approach as a strategy for action. So, can you guys explain a bit of this, so we can understand the dual track approach?
Sure. So when we're thinking about the timeline, there are two timelines that we're keeping in mind. One is the very taking things step by step, assuming that we still have a decade. And this is the assumption that a lot of large organizations are following. So we're doing our research, we're waiting for the cryptography to mature, we're doing very rigorous testing, we're moving things very slowly, and then we take about 7 years to go from where we are now to quantum secure Bitcoin. And then the other timeline is we need to act now. So if tomorrow morning, for some reason, we believe that the quantum computer is around the corner, we need to choose a signature. There are a few options for signature schemes. None of them are amazing, but we can work with them. So we do things in an accelerated phase. We choose something, we move forward, we start migrating UTXOs and so on, and then the whole process is something like 2 years, where things become secure or unstealable much, much earlier. So these are the two timelines that we're keeping in mind when we're thinking about moving Bitcoin to a quantum secure space. And we can move from one to the other. We can start by, carefully researching, going through the literature, and then if and when something in the world changes, we can switch from this is going to take 7 years to we're going to be done in 2 years.
Yeah, gotcha. And I guess kind of to the disruptive point we were talking about before, if it is a very soon thing, then it's going to be like a running for the lifeboat situation where, people will be like quickly trying to transition from the old schemes into the new schemes. And, it's going to be chaos in the mempools and, this kind of thing. Whereas if it's like a long range transition, like this wallet idea that automatically has both, that's going to be a less disruptive approach, I guess.
Yeah.
And again, if you're super worried, move your UTXOs to a hashed address, and then you can hang out for years
Right.
and quantum.
Yeah, because now you're only
can't
vulnerable
attack
to
you.
short range attacks, not long range attacks.
Yep. And short range attacks will you need a much more capable quantum computer to be able to exploit those. So it's going to take a long time to crack keys initially with the first quantum computers that are capable. And then, 10 years later or something, whatever, then short range attacks become viable. But like just back to the timeline, like the 7 years we think is comparable to like the time it took to do SegWit and more recently Taproot. So like if you like consider when they started, all the proposals that were put forward, and then when the BIPs were like created and then activated, like they were around 7 years. So there's like parallels. We've got parallels with similar magnitude changes. I mean, probably post-quantum stuff's going to be bigger, but these are like numbers that we've kind of got some backing for.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, there'll be OG hodlers who don't move their coins around that often, and it'll be kind of kind of first, assuming the community and the developers kind of decide this is the path forward, then there's kind of the communication and kind of getting the software built for it, and then getting people to actually upgrade to it. I mean, it's going to, all of these things will take time and, efforts to kind of get everybody upgraded. And so, yeah, and there may even be disagreements in the community about like what's the right path forward, or there may be some who think, no, I don't believe there is a quantum computer stealing coins or whatever. I mean, who knows? So yeah, okay. So I guess just summarizing a few of the kind of, we've covered a lot of stuff this episode, so I'm going to do my best to just give a summary for listeners. So short version of it is people used to be more skeptical of this quantum computing stuff, but now more recently, it seems that people are seeing this as a more realistic risk on a, let's say, a 10-year basis, something like that. The latest numbers, as you've quoted to me, it's something like a third of the coins that are in existence today are vulnerable. That is because of either the script type being an old vulnerable script type, or the the public key has been disclosed in a public way, and therefore it's vulnerable. And some of the mitigations are still being discussed, different quantum signature schemes, and the idea would be hopefully that we can have a graceful transition into a new system where maybe people are kind of transacting with a wallet that maybe speaks both, but eventually there might be a cutoff period where we cut off the old way and only have the new way. But many of these things are, let's say, subject still to debate. So I guess that's I'm kind of trying to loosely summarize the key points there. Any closing thoughts from you? And of course, we will put the links in the show notes, but where can people find you as well?
So thanks for having us. Yeah, I think this is a very important discussion to start right now. I know there are researchers working on this. If you're interested in the subject, feel free to reach out. You can find our reports. You can find us on Twitter, GitHub, the usual places. The report is also floating there or here in the, I guess we'll put the link.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anthony, anything from you?
Yeah, we've got our domain pq-bitcoin.org, which is just like got the report up there, and we'll have some more content looking into the data, like what is exposed, the history of exposure, who's exposed. So that will be published in the next few weeks. But yeah, you can find me on Nostr or Twitter or X, OzDeadman or DeadmanOz.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Clara and Anthony, thank you for joining me and doing your best to keep this accessible for our everyday hodlers. It's definitely a very technical subject, and I appreciate the research you guys are doing to try to pull these pieces together and make it, I guess, understandable for us. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. Thanks.